Hello, welcome to BBC News. After a breezing encounter in Brussels, the British Prime Minister Theresa May says she still believes she can get extra assurances from EU leaders to get her Brexit withdrawal agreement through the UK Parliament. EU leaders say they won't renegotiate, but they will offer what they call further clarifications on the so-called backstop. That's the safety net aimed at avoiding a hard trade border between the EU and the UK on the island of Ireland, if no future deal is agreed in time. This report from Laura Kunsberg in Brussels.
A bad omen, a bitter morning, for more than one reason. The Prime Minister came to Brussels hunting concessions from the EU.
Does the EU like your plan, Prime Minister?
But they didn't just say no. One of their top politicians said she didn't even know what she wanted. She was nebulous, leading this private, careful politician to show real anger. "Did you call me nebulous?" she seems to say to Jean-Claude Juncker. He grasping her arm. The microphones may be off, but you can exactly what went on. The Dutch Prime Minister comes along to try to make peace. Later, she had not forgotten the accusation.
I was crystal clear about the assurances which are needed on the backstop, having heard the views of MPs in the House of Commons. I reiterated that it is in the interests of the EU, as well as the UK, to get this over the line.
EU leaders had said she would not get those concessions on the so-called backstop. She begged to differ.
My discussions with colleagues today have shown that further clarification and discussion following the Council's conclusions is in fact possible.
You looked very angry when you were speaking to Jean-Claude Juncker earlier today. What did you say to him, and did he admit that he had called you nebulous? And secondly, the summit conclusions suggest the EU is not willing to budge, but you appear to be suggesting that they might. Can you tell us more about what they've said to you about their willingness to move? Because if Parliament won't budge and the EU won't budge, is it time for you to budge?
Well, first of all, I had a robust discussion with Jean-Claude Juncker. I think that's the sort of discussion you're able to have when you've developed a working relationship and you work well together. What came out of that was his clarity that actually he'd been talking, when he used that particular phrase, he'd been talking about a general level of debate. We can look at this issue of further clarification and that has been something I've been discussing with a number of EU leaders. So we will be working expeditiously over the coming days to seek those further assurances that I believe MPs will need.
You might wonder what exactly has been these negotiations. What are the misunderstandings in the relations between the EU and the Prime Minister? What has the President of the European Commission been up to since that row?
We were not dancing. She thought that I did criticize her by saying yesterday night that the British position was nebulous. I did not refer to her, but to the overall state of the debate in Britain.
On and off the stage, the message from the EU is clear. They promise they'll do a trade deal as quickly as possible, so the backstop's never needed. But that cannot mean changing what's already been agreed. The Prime Minister leaves here with a big problem. Remember, she kept her job in part this week because she promised she could get more compromise from her fellow EU leaders. But she's left tonight with assurances that there could be more conversations. And that simply might not be concrete enough to protect her in a hostile environment at home.
Lawyer Michael Cohen. Mr. Cohen's spoken out for the first time since being sentenced for crimes including campaign finance violations. He claims the President told him to pay off two women during the 2016 presidential election, even though he knew it was wrong. That directly contradicts what Donald Trump has said. The BBC's North America editor John Sopel reports.
An alleged one-night stand in 2006, and then a payment to buy Stormy Daniels' silence 10 years later, just before the 2016 elections. They're still causing Donald Trump and those around him endless legal nightmares. The president's longtime lawyer, Mr. Fix-It, Michael Cohen, was this week sentenced to 3 years in prison. And he's now given an interview refuting Donald Trump's claims that he made the payments to her without the president knowing about it.
Nothing at the Trump Organization was ever done unless it was run through Mr. Trump. He directed me, as I said in my allocution, and I said as well in the plea, he directed me to become involved in these matters.
I'm going to use some Tic Tacs just in case I start kissing her.
The payment came at a delicate time in the presidential campaign.
It's a magnet. I don't even wait. And when you're a star, they let you do it. You can do anything.
A tape had emerged of Donald Trump boasting about sexually assaulting women. In the interview today, Cohen said the payment was made because the president wanted to avoid fresh scandal weeks before the election.
He was trying to hide what you were doing, correct?
Correct.
And he knew it was wrong?
Of course.
And he was doing that to help his election?
You have to remember at what point in time that this matter came about, 2 weeks or so before the election, post the Billy Bush comments. So yes, he was very concerned about how this would affect the election.
But Donald Trump says Cohen is a proven liar, and his only regret is ever employing him.
I never directed him to do anything wrong. Whatever he did on his own. He's a lawyer. A lawyer who represents a client is supposed to do the right thing. That's why you pay them a lot of money, etc., etc.
Donald Trump's account of what happened has changed consistently. First of all, denying he knew anything about a payment to Stormy Daniels, then admitting he did, then saying it had nothing to do with campaign finance, it was a personal matter, and then saying, well, yes, campaign finances, but that's not against the law. And finally, his lawyer saying, nobody got killed, no one was robbed, this is not a big crime. In other words, it didn't really matter what Donald Trump had done. John Sopel, BBC News, Washington.
President Trump has named his current budget director, Mick Mulvaney, as his acting chief of staff. He replaces General John Kelly after days of speculation over who would take the post and some high-profile names pulling out. The president made the announcement on Twitter saying this: "I'm pleased to announce that Mick Mulvaney, Director of Office of Management and Budget, will be named acting White House Chief of Staff, replacing General John Kelly, who has served our country with distinction." Well, earlier I spoke to the BBC correspondent David Willis about what more we know about the new acting Chief of Staff.
Well, what's interesting, I think, about this, first of all, Martin, is that Mike Mulvaney has been named to this position on an interim basis, if you like. Donald Trump in his tweet says that he will be the acting White House Chief of Staff when he takes over from John Kelly, presumably at the end of the year. Now, it's normally one of the most prestigious jobs in government here, that of White House Chief of Staff, but Donald Trump has found it terribly difficult to fill that position. He tapped Nick Ayers, who was Mike Pence's Chief of Staff. Nick Ayers didn't want to do it, so he went on to Mark Meadows, representative in Congress. He also didn't want to do it. Even Chris Christie is known to be an ambitious politician and was part of Donald Trump's campaign team, turned it down. So now he has alighted upon Mike Mulvaney, who is currently the director of the White House Office of Management. And it's interesting, the fact that Mike Mulvaney has taken this post on an interim basis, something that Nick Ayers, Mike Pence's Chief of Staff, was willing to do, but Donald Trump was emphatic then that it had to be a 2-year spell. Well, he's modified that requirement, presumably now because he's had to. Perhaps he's running out of candidates, you might conclude.
Fighting has broken out on the outskirts of Yemen's port city of Hodeidah, first since a UN-brokered ceasefire came into effect on Friday. People living there say they could hear artillery shelling and automatic gunfire. The Saudi-backed government and the Iranian-backed Houthi rebels had reached a truce agreement for Hodeidah after a week of talks in Sweden. More food aid has begun arriving at the port. The UN has warned that 14 million Yemenis are on the brink of starvation. Well, the BBC's chief international correspondent, Lise Doucet, has reported extensively from Yemen and from the peace talks. And I asked her if the ceasefire can hold.
Well, the situation is still very tense in Hodeidah. You have the Houthi forces which control the port in the adjacent city. You have Yemeni government and Emirati forces massed on the outskirts of the city. So this agreement, this unexpected agreement on a ceasefire, is very fragile and it's fraught with risk. So it's perhaps not surprising, it's regrettable but not surprising that there's been this, it seems to be a sporadic fighting. But no one is saying the ceasefire is dead. It's largely holding. And it has to be said, it has brought rare hope and such relief that at last, this is the most significant breakthrough in 5 years of talks hosted by the UN.
And this port is so significant because this is the way most food can get in, right? And supplies and relief for people who've been under siege for 4 years.
Keeping the port open means keeping Yemenis alive. This is a country which has the greatest percentage of its people dependent on food aid. 2/3 of Yemenis depend on some kind of food aid just to survive, and 10 million, says the UN, don't know where their next meal will come from. So they need the port. The port is the lifeline for the humanitarian aid and also for the commercial imports, for the food and other essential goods, and the prices have been rising that even Yemenis who have a little bit of money can't afford to buy them. And that is what has created this real fear of the risk of famine.
You've reported from there many times. There's a danger, I suppose, after, what, 3 or 4 years, positions get entrenched. Fighters maybe don't want to give up the fight, or do you think somehow there's a slight change in the political atmosphere and this could be different this time?
Well, your question, actually points to what is one of the biggest challenges in Yemen, which is you have the political delegations who met in the Swedish countryside, and it was quite extraordinary to see them. And so many Yemenis, when they saw the image of the head of the Yemeni government delegation, the head of the Houthi delegation, with the UN Secretary General Antonio Guterres in the middle, smiling, shaking hands, it was a rare moment of hope. In fact, just before I came to the BBC tonight, I got this message from a Yemeni woman activist. She goes, "Did you see the special message of hope? Did you see that handshake?" And even the Yemeni foreign minister, he joked on social media. He said, "Oh, the UN Secretary General thought he had to bring us together." He said, "I told him, you don't. We're brothers." But the reality is there's so little trust. And on the battlefield, there is now many more other Yemeni groups who are benefiting not from peace, but from war. And they don't want that war to end.
Stay with us on BBC News. Still to come, after a terrifying capsize in a huge storm in the Pacific, round-the-world sailor Susie Goodall finally has her feet on dry land.
After 8 months on the run, Saddam Hussein has been tracked down and captured by American forces.
Saddam Hussein is finished because he killed our people, our women, our children.
The signatures took only a few minutes, but they brought a formal end to 3.5 years of conflict that has claimed more than 200,000 lives. Before an audience of world leaders, the presidents of Bosnia, Serbia and Croatia put their names to the peace agreement.
The Romanian border was sealed and silent today. Romania has cut itself off from the outside world in order to prevent the details of the presumed massacre in Timișoara from leaking out.
From sex at the White House to a trial for his political life, the Lewinsky affair tonight guaranteed Bill Clinton his place in history as only the second president ever to be impeached.
This is BBC News. Here are the latest headlines. The British Prime Minister has insisted that it's still possible to get her Brexit deal through Parliament, despite the EU ruling out any renegotiation. Donald Trump's former lawyer has said the President knew it was wrong to order payments to keep two women silent about their alleged affairs with him. The Christmas market in Strasbourg has reopened after a horrific gun attack 2 days ago. French President Emmanuel Macron visited the market a short while ago, laying a flower at a memorial to victims of the attack. The number of dead in the shooting has risen to 4. Several more remain seriously injured. The suspected gunman, Sherif Shikat, was killed on Thursday night in a shootout with police. From Strasbourg, Gavin Lee sent this report.
Strasbourg, in lights once again, after 2 days of darkness. The main square where people fled for their lives on Tuesday night wasn't considered safe during the search for the gunman. But these famous Christmas markets, the oldest in France, have now reopened. The manhunt over, there's a keep calm and carry on spirit here.
Everyone comes back because I think they want to show that we are living and
we are still alive.
Still alive, so
we have to enjoy the moment. And we have to take some hot wine.
Hot wine.
Do you feel generally safe here now?
Yes, relieved. Yes.
I'm from Paris, and my family was worried, and they didn't want me to come here, but finally it feels safe here, and I don't regret, because even if it was a little sad yesterday, today is okay.
The fact that I came here is to show that you don't need to be afraid of a certain minority. The majority is not like that. Not at all. And being a Muslim, it's not the side that we want to show.
It was on this street in the Strasbourg suburb of Neudorf where the gunman Sherif Shikat was found and killed. Bullet holes in the doorway mark the moment Shikat was confronted by patrol officers who he fired at. They fired back and shot him dead. The 29-year-old, born in Strasbourg to an Algerian family, is believed to have hidden in the same area for 2 days. The Islamist cell IS claimed he was working on orders, though French authorities say he had been acting alone with no support network behind him.
A major focus of the police investigation will now look at what went wrong in French surveillance methods after the suspect was added to a list of those being monitored for extremist behaviour. But for now, in the city that promotes itself as a capital of Christmas, it's slowly moving on and returning to normal. Gavin Lee, BBC News, Strasbourg.
Chelsea have condemned fans who were heard singing anti-Semitic songs during their Europa League match against Vidi in Hungary last night, saying they shamed the club. It comes just days after 4 fans were suspended for the alleged racial abuse of the Manchester City and England player Raheem Sterling in Chelsea's previous match. Our sports correspondent Joe Wilson reports.
At their home ground, Chelsea present a global welcome. But this is a football club being shamed by a section of its supporters, and Chelsea made that clear today. Last night's match was a routine European fixture, but some of Chelsea's fans took the opportunity in Hungary to chant anti-Semitic words about a rival club in London, Tottenham. Today came a reaction from a man who's previously filmed football supporters making anti-Semitic chants. Ivor Badil directed an educational film for Chelsea. He is a Chelsea supporter.
You might think you're making anti-Tottenham chants, but actually when you sing "Birds Are on Their Way to Auschwitz," this is what you're really chanting about. Clearly there are people who think it's okay, and maybe, as I say, maybe they don't really understand what it is they're chanting and why Jewish people and you know, well, everyone is so offended by it. All but the most hardened fascist would realise now that was wrong.
Chelsea today reiterated their abhorrence of race hatred, saying any individuals that can't summon the brain power to comprehend this simple message and are found having shamed the club by using anti-Semitic or racist words or actions will face the strongest possible action from the club. Instances of anti-Semitism are especially poignant and hard to comprehend at this club. After all, Roman Abramovich, who has bankrolled Chelsea for so many years, is himself Jewish. But last night's events come hard on the heels of Chelsea's game against Manchester City and what happened there to Raheem Sterling. Allegations that he was racially abused by a Chelsea supporter have provoked an inquiry and a whole debate about football and race. Remember the banana skin which was thrown towards Pierre-Emerick Aubameyang during Arsenal's recent game against Tottenham. Today's focus is firmly on Chelsea, but just part of big issues for football and society. Joe Wilson, BBC News, West London.
Her terrifying journey made headlines around the world. Now, a British sailor whose boat capsized during a storm in the South Pacific has finally arrived in Chile. It's a week since Susie Goodall was rescued by a Chinese cargo ship, as she tried to circle the globe solo. Duncan Kennedy has more.
This is what relief looks like when you step ashore after surviving the drama, the mid-ocean crisis. A hug from mum Brigitte and brother Tim means Susie Goodall's ordeal is finally over. Then it was on to a medical checkup before she gave her first insight into the trauma she faced 2,000 miles from land.
If you asked me if I would do this again, now knowing what it's like, I would say yes in a heartbeat. But as I said to the Chilean Navy captain who brought me ashore from Tianfu, I created so much work for everyone involved in the rescue, to which he responded, "Of course you must do it again." You may ask why. Some people just live for adventure. It's human nature. And for me, the sea is where my adventure lies.
It was the wild seas of the Southern Ocean with its 7-metre waves that triggered the emergency last week. In sailing terms, Susie's yacht pitch-poled, meaning it somersaulted forward end over end, smashing the mast and leaving her stranded for more than 2 days.
The boat is destroyed. Inside and out is destroyed.
It took a crane from a passing freight ship to hoist her out of danger. Susie, who's 29, was the youngest competitor in this Golden Globe race before she hit the storm. But she trained here at the UK Sailing Academy on the Isle of Wight. This afternoon we showed her friends the moment she made it back to shore in Chile.
Wow. Amazing. Oh my God. Gives you goosebumps. Yeah. Oh, it does. Really pleased for Susie and especially her family. She's been through a real ordeal and experience and adventure over the last few weeks, so pleased that she's made it back safely.
Susie Goodall is the third sailor to be rescued in this year's race, but now she's safe and heading home for Christmas. Duncan Kennedy, BBC News.
Well, the results are in and we have a winner. Mohamed Salah's been named the BBC African Footballer of the Year for the second time in a row. He was presented with his award in Liverpool by BBC Sport Africa's Mimi Fawaz.
So I'm here with the winner. Congratulations, Mohamed.
Thank you.
Take it, it's all yours.
Last
year when I presented you with the award, you said you'd like to win it again this year. Yeah. You've done it. What does it feel like being the first player since J.J. Okocha in 2004 to win this back-to-back?
I think it's great feeling, you know. I would like to win it also next year, so I'm looking forward from now. But, you know, it's a great feeling to win another award 2 years in a row, so happy to win it.
When you look back at your 2018, what have been for you some of the individual moments where you feel you were at the top of your game?
I think there's many moments in 2018, like I can say like the game against Tottenham was top, the game against Rome here was also unbelievable. So each moment I feel like I'm scoring goals, helping the team to get the points, to be top in the league, you know, and that's always great feeling.
Anything that you'll be looking forward to in the coming year for you overall?
I think just I want to win something with the club, so everyone is excited, everyone is happy about that. So I also try to push myself every day, you know, to help the team to win something. I'm sure this season everyone has I don't want to say motivation, but everyone wants to win something. So I think we will carry on until we see.
Congratulations, Mohamed, the winner for the 2018 BBC African Footballer of the Year.
Thank you very much. Thank you.
Yeah, well done to Mo Salah. Now, Britain's royal family have revealed the photos they're putting on their Christmas cards this year. Don't worry if you're not on their list, we can show you what they've picked. First up, Duke and Duchess of Cambridge. They've chosen this picture of their family, which was taken at their Norfolk home. This is Harry and Meghan, seen watching fireworks at their wedding reception back in May. And the Duke and Duchess of Cornwall, meanwhile, something more seated on a bench indeed, and this photograph was snapped in the grounds of Clarence House. Any one of which, I'm sure, would look wonderful on your mantelpiece. Do let us know if you've managed to collect the whole set. If you'd like to talk to me, I'm available on Twitter @Martin Stanford. That's the way our world looks so far today. Thank you for watching BBC News.
Hello. After a fairly quiet day on Friday, the weather is about to turn much more lively as we head through the course of the weekend. We've got a named storm, Storm Deirdre. It's been named by Met Erin. That is bringing some very disruptive weather this weekend. There's warnings, amber warnings from the Met Office for ice and snow. There's also going to be some freezing rain, which will bring widespread ice on any roads and untreated surfaces too. Here is where we've got the amber warnings out through Saturday and early into Sunday too. Ice warnings across much of northern England and southern Scotland. We'll also have snow and freezing rain here. Heavy snow across many central parts of Scotland, mainly to the north of the Central Belt. Now, the reason for all this disruptive weather is milder air moving in from the Atlantic with these weather fronts which are packing in and bumping into this cold air. So a cold Saturday dawn, temperatures sub-zero for many of us. That milder air works in from the west along with the rain, the freezing rain and the ice and snow too. Not just the rain, freezing rain, ice and snow, but also some strong winds which will cause some disruption too. So you can see the rain edging its way gradually eastwards across the country, bumping into that cold air in place, and it will be turning to snow, mostly over the higher ground for the north of Wales, the Pennines too, but even to the south of that we could get 1 or 2 flakes of snow early on before it turns back to rain, I think, during the middle part of the afternoon. Could be about 2 to 5 centimetres of snow, even to relatively low levels across parts of northern England. To the north of the Central Belt, 10 to 20 centimetres of snow. And the freezing rain really will be quite dangerous. That's rain droplets that will just freeze instantly on impact with the cold ground, bringing a real instant ice rink effect. So some pretty disruptive weather through the course of Saturday, all down to Storm Deirdre. It's going to continue to cause disruption to travel through Saturday night and on into Sunday too, with that mix of freezing rain, snow, ice and also strong winds too. Your BBC local radio stations will keep you up to date with any disruption to travel. So heading on into the second half of the weekend, and we start off Sunday still with some rain and snow towards the northeast, which should slowly clear away. It will be a drier day compared to Saturday, not as windy, more sunshine in the east, but remember there will be some lying snow and still a risk of ice. Further rain showers then packing in from the west, I think, later on in the day. Won't be quite as cold, so those temperatures starting to nudge up around about 6 to 10 degrees through the day on Sunday. Then things start to turn a little bit milder into the new working week, still unsettled, with further showers for Monday and Tuesday too. Bye for now.
This Christmas, follow the story on your new smart speaker. Just ask for BBC News. Get all the news you care about by personalising your app. And as you look forward to the year ahead, send us your questions via #BBCAskThis. Follow the story wherever you are with BBC News.
The moments that define the year. Review 2018, all next week on the BBC News Channel.
This is BBC News. Here are the headlines. Britain's Prime Minister has insisted talks with the rest of the European Union will continue over further clarification of the arrangements for the Northern Ireland border. Theresa May said she had held robust talks with the European Commission President Jean-Claude Juncker after he'd complained her requests for clarifications were imprecise. Donald Trump's former lawyer says the US president knew it was wrong to order payments before the election to keep 2 women silent about their alleged affairs with him. Mr. Trump has denied asking Michael Cohen, who's been sentenced to 3 years in jail, to break the law. And there have been sporadic clashes on the outskirts of the crucial Yemeni port of Hodeidah, putting at risk a ceasefire that came into effect on Friday. The UN Special Envoy for Yemen said a robust monitoring scheme was needed to ensure the truce could take hold. Now on BBC News, as we reach the end of 2018, events to mark 100 years since the end of World War I have come to a close. The BBC's Robert Hall presents a special programme showing how millions of people commemorated those who fought and died a century ago.
Last month, Europe marked the end of a terrible conflict. The First World War cost millions of lives and ruined millions more. A century on from the armistice, this generation paused to remember tragedies, both global and personal.
You just cannot believe what man can do to man.
I mean, I'm known in the village as Poppy Lady now.
This is the Imperial War Museum in London. Today, along with its sister sites around the UK, it reflects world conflict across the generations. The museum was founded back in 1917 to tell the story of the World War. Last month, the Duchess of Cambridge was here to see a cascade of poppies marking British and Commonwealth lives lost. Around Britain, the centenary of the armistice brought thousands more events in cities, towns, villages and even on our beaches. The film director Danny Boyle, who masterminded the 2012 Olympic opening ceremony in London, led an initiative to create sand portraits of soldiers lost on the battlefields. Sean Peel from BBC Look East watched one project unfolding at Brancaster in Norfolk.
A crisp autumn afternoon on Brancaster Beach. Tide out, bright sunshine lighting the scene as families and walkers enjoyed just being together. A perfect Sunday to remember those no longer here. With the wet sand providing a canvas, work began to create a portrait of a man who died in the Great War. There and gone like the tide, never to return to these shores. They're creating an image of driver Stephen Hewitt. He was born in Halvergate in Norfolk and died in 1916, aged 37.
Well, luckily sand is quite flexible, so you can always sort of cover over a little bit if it's not working. But yeah, we wanted to be careful. We worked in pairs to keep checking that we were doing it right, and I think we're really pleased with the end result.
Stephen Hewitt was a driver in the field artillery looking after the horses used to take the guns into battle. He was fighting the Bulgarians in Greece, but one day out riding he was attacked by a pack of wolves and died of his injuries. For Amelia Ord, it was an emotional day. Stephen Hewitt was her great-granddad. She only heard this was happening 2 days before, a chance glance at a piece in a newspaper, so she drove here from Newcastle.
Very emotional. I've cried all the way down on the journey today. I always find Remembrance Sunday emotional, and I think it's because I do, I'm interested in our family history, and today, much more. So we made sure we stopped at 11 o'clock to do a 2 minutes, silence, and it's been tugging at the heartstrings all morning. We'll be here till it's dark.
The century's tides, chanting their bitter psalms, cannot heal it. Not the war to end all wars, death's birthing place.
As the light faded, a poem was recited, Pages of the Sea by the poet laureate Carol Ann Duffy.
History might as well be water, chastising this shore, for we learn nothing from your endless sacrifice.
At the going down of the day, those who came to remember left before nightfall, leaving the incoming tide to take driver Stephen Hewitt into its arms.
The armistice commemorations have centred on lives lost in combat. But as Jerry Jackson from BBC Look North discovered, among the graves of those killed during 4 years of bloodshed are others of men who died after the fighting stopped.
Our First World War dead lie in hundreds of Commonwealth war cemeteries on the battlefields of Europe, the Middle East and Africa. But more than 130,000 of them died in the UK. This is Sunderland. As the leaves fell in 1918, many relatives must have thought their loved ones had made it through the worst. Private Robert Reevely is wounded in France in mid-October and is invalided back to a hospital in the Midlands, where he dies on the 10th of November. It's almost certain that his wife Kate in Roker would have received the telegram on Armistice Day, perhaps as the church bells were ringing and people were in the streets celebrating. On the 12th, she writes to his regiment asking for the return of his personal belongings. She says, "I shall be very grateful if you will oblige me in this matter. It may seem a small thing to ask for, but it means a lot to me." Andrew Neil had been blinded in the war. He died 6 months after the armistice and should have had a military headstone. For nearly a century, he lay in an unmarked grave.
The problem was that his death certificate said Jacksonian epilepsy, but it wasn't attributing that to war injuries. We knew that he died as a result of the Great War. Then, sometime later, we got his pension disability card.
And this is it.
And this is it. Same cause of death, but in small letters, due to active service. You know, the man gave his eyes and his life for his country, and now he's got something back to recognise that.
My mum and my aunties just said my granddad was blind in the First World War. Never knew anything else. To see the stone now, and especially when you drive up the road and it gleams, it's just fantastic.
Sergeant Neil's story is one of many researched by the Northumbria World War I Commemoration Project, a 7-year community volunteer remembrance endeavour. John Ewell from County Durham had won the Victoria Cross in the Italian Alps in the summer of 1918. He was killed 4 days before the fighting ended there in October. News of his death only reached his family on Armistice Day. You can't help wondering what these people would have become, what they would have gone on to do. Collectively, they made a sacrifice which we can scarcely imagine today, and surely for that at least we should remain grateful.
This anniversary, perhaps more than any other, has drawn us into our own family history. 80-year-old Andrew Sturt from Surrey had never visited the battlefields, but he wanted to find the graves of 3 uncles who still lie on the Western Front. BBC South Today went with him.
Andrew and his son Richard are making a special journey. Aged 80, Andrew sees this as his last chance to visit the graves of his 3 uncles who all died fighting in France. He's never made this trip before. They head to Noyon Cemetery in the north of France.
We're getting close to the British section now, where your Uncle Harold